This is not just a murder case. This is not just a cult. This is a nightmare that took years to unfold. A Turkish family living in total isolation. A manipulative man who claimed to fight demons. And a missing woman buried in silence. This is the true story of the Palu family. To understand this story, we have to go back to a small town in eastern Turkey. The Palu family was large, 2 parents, several children, in-laws. They were quiet, religious, and lived a very traditional life. Then came Tuncer Ustael. He wasn't born into the family. He married into it. But somehow, he became their leader. A man who controlled their every move. He claimed to be guided by spiritual forces. He said that evil energies, demons, and black magic were haunting the family, and only he could protect them. And they believed him. Tuncer wasn't educated. He wasn't wealthy. But he had something more powerful, the ability to manipulate, isolate, and control minds. He began separating the family from the outside world. No visitors. No phones. No questions. Tuncer Ustael married into the Palu family by wedding Meryem Palu, one of Harun and Hava Palu's daughters. Upon joining the family, he introduced himself as an Islamic Haja, who could control jinns, supernatural beings in Islamic belief. This claim allowed him to gain significant influence over most family members, except for Harun Palu and his son-in-law Ahmet, who remained skeptical of Ustael's assertions. Ustael's manipulation extended to convincing family members that they were under constant spiritual attack, leading them to isolate themselves from the outside world. He exploited their fears, asserting that only he could protect them from these malevolent forces. Tuncer Ustael's control over the Palu family deepened with disturbing speed. No longer just the husband of Meryem, he had become the unquestioned spiritual leader of the household. He convinced the entire family that they were cursed, under attack by dark forces, and that only he, through his supposed connection with jinn, could protect them. This belief wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced. Any dissent was punished with violence. He began isolating the family from the outside world. One by one, he convinced them that neighbors, relatives, even the government were under demonic influence. He especially targeted Meryem, accusing her of being possessed by evil spirits. Under this delusion, he began physically torturing her, locking her in rooms for days, depriving her of food, subjecting her to unspeakable pain, all while claiming it was for her spiritual cleansing. The other family members, lost in their fear and desperation, stood by. Some even helped. But the cruelty didn't end with Meryem. Tuncer began subjecting the children to horrifying punishments. He abused them emotionally, physically, and, as some have testified, even sexually. At one point, he convinced the family to sell their home, claiming it was spiritually contaminated. With nowhere to go, they began living in a car parked on the outskirts of town. This wasn't poverty. It was control. It was cult behavior, built on fear and submission. As Tuncer Ustael's control tightened, only one person dared to resist, Meryem Palu. She refused to believe in his tales of jinn and black magic. She rejected his authority and challenged his so-called spiritual knowledge. But in a household consumed by fear and blind obedience, her voice became a threat. Tuncer responded with cruelty cloaked as purification. He began what he claimed was a ritual of cleansing. First, he forced Meryem to drink alcohol mixed with chemicals, a toxic cocktail of esperto, a substance never meant for consumption. When her body resisted, he took it further, injecting it directly into her bloodstream using syringes. Her condition deteriorated slowly, painfully. Her resistance turned into silence. But the torture didn't stop. Her young daughter Meryem, innocent and voiceless, became the next target. Witnesses would later say the child was starved, isolated, and terrorized. She, too, was allegedly injected with poison. All while the rest of the family stood by, not just watching, but believing they were doing the right thing. Tuncer had convinced them that these two souls were cursed, that their deaths were necessary for the family's salvation. In their final hours, Meryem and her daughter were taken to a secluded area. Tuncer ordered the family to tie them to a tree and wait for them to die. It wasn't a quick death. It was slow, quiet, forgotten by the world. But the story didn't end there. Years later, the surviving members of the Palu family appeared on a sensational Turkish crime talk show. Millions watched in horror as Tuncer doubled down on his delusions. In one of the most shocking moments in Turkish television history, he accused Meryem of sexually assaulting him. The statement was biologically absurd, completely detached from reality, but even then, the family believed him. The host, visibly disturbed, tried to intervene. "That's impossible," she said. "That cannot happen. What you're saying is not scientifically possible." But Tuncer wouldn't back down. His grip on the family remained intact, even years after the deaths. Even in front of a national audience. This was no longer just a murder case. It had become a nightmarish example of how psychological manipulation, religious exploitation, and mass delusion can lead to something far darker than simple crime. It was evil, performed in the name of salvation. For years, the Palu family lived under a veil of secrets, lies, and unspeakable horror. The townspeople whispered, but no one truly knew what went on behind the doors of their broken home. That is, until 2018, when the entire nation was shaken awake by a series of disturbing appearances on a popular Turkish crime television show. It started when family members reached out to the media, claiming they were being targeted by evil spirits and conspiracies. Producers were intrigued. They invited them on air, unaware of the storm they were about to unleash. What began as a bizarre case of missing persons quickly morphed into one of the most disturbing televised confessions in Turkish history. Piece by piece, the horrifying truth began to unravel live on screen. Viewers watched in disbelief as family members, seemingly hypnotized by Tuncer Ustael, spoke of demons, rituals, and death. Each episode grew darker, more surreal. The audience wasn't just watching a talk show anymore. They were witnessing a real-time psychological autopsy of a cult-like nightmare. But something changed. Among the chaos, inconsistencies in their stories emerged. A former relative stepped forward. A journalist asked the right question. Law enforcement began digging deeper. Suddenly, missing persons cases from over a decade ago were being reopened. Forensic teams re-examined old evidence. And it became clear, this wasn't about jinn or black magic. This was about cold-blooded murder. In early 2019, the police made their move. Tuncer Ustael was arrested, along with several members of the Palu family. During interrogations, his delusions remained intact. He spoke of curses, prophecies, and divine missions. But the facts were undeniable. The remains of Meryem and her daughter Meryem were recovered. The timeline of abuse, manipulation, and terror fit together like a morbid puzzle. The trial was explosive. In court, witnesses recounted years of mental and physical abuse. Psychiatrists testified to the psychological grip Tuncer had over the family. The prosecution painted a chilling picture: a man who had weaponized religion and fear to orchestrate a series of tortures and murders, all while convincing his followers they were doing holy work. In the end, justice spoke louder than madness. Tuncer Ustael was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, along with heavy sentences for several other family members who had aided or enabled the crimes. The courtroom was silent when the verdict was read. No cheers. No closure. Just the haunting realization of what blind faith and unchecked control can destroy. But even now, long after the cameras stopped rolling, one question remains. How many others live in silence, under the rule of their own Tuncer? This was never just a murder story. It was a mirror, held up to the darkest corners of human psychology. The Palu case wasn't about one man's evil. It was about how fear can override reason, how manipulation can wear the face of faith, and how silence can allow unthinkable horror to grow unchecked. In 2019, after the shocking revelations on live television and a full criminal investigation, justice finally caught up with the Palu family. Tuncer Ustael, the self-proclaimed healer, was sentenced to aggravated life imprisonment for the murder of Meryem, along with additional prison time for multiple counts of torture and abuse. Harun Palu, Meryem's brother, also received life imprisonment, convicted of aiding in the murder. Fadi Palu, Ice Palu, and Hava Palu, other family members who enabled and participated in the crimes, received sentences ranging from 12.5 to 19 years in prison, depending on their involvement. The courtroom remained eerily silent as each verdict was read aloud. No one cheered. No one cried. There was no peace, only the weight of knowing what had been allowed to happen under the guise of family, faith, and obedience. But even now, years after the trial, one haunting question lingers. How many others are still trapped in invisible prisons like this one? This wasn't just a Turkish tragedy, it's a universal warning. Wherever unchecked control exists, wherever superstition replaces truth, wherever victims are silenced by loyalty or fear, horror is always waiting to be born. And that's what makes the Palu case truly terrifying. Because it could happen again. Anywhere.